Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are setting the stage for an absolutely incredible historical journey. We're going to trace the profound legal and social transformation, starting from the really harsh survival of the fittest laws of ancient Arabia and traveling all the way to the rights-based inheritance systems that are being studied and applied in modern Indonesia today. It's a fascinating look at how society redefines what justice actually means. So let's get right into it.
So right off the bat, we have to ask a pretty fundamental question. Is a justice system truly fair if only the strongest survive? I want you to imagine living in a time and place where your legal rights, your economic security, and honestly, even your personal freedom were determined entirely by your physical ability to wield a sword and protect a caravan. We are about to look at an era where the law was built purely on military might and economic dominance.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the socio-economic reality of the Jahiliyyah period, which led directly to inheritance based on physical strength. Then we'll break down the Islamic legal revolution, see how that protected the vulnerable, and finally connect all of this to modern law in Indonesia.
Part 1. The Jahiliyyah socio-economic reality.
To truly understand the law, you have to understand the land. Pre-Islamic Makkah was defined by a grueling, incredibly resource-scarce desert environment. Agriculture, it really wasn't an option. Survival relied almost entirely on long-distance trade and herding. And out there in the desert, you faced the constant threat of raids. What that meant was that physical strength, like the sheer ability to defend a caravan and secure a water source, became the ultimate form of social and legal capital. In this framework, wealth just wasn't seen as an individual right. It was viewed entirely as collective tribal power.
Part 2. Inheritance by physical strength. Because of that harsh environment, Jahiliyyah inheritance was built on 3 highly utilitarian pillars. First up was limited kinship. Blood ties mattered, sure, but only if you were a strong, adult male who could literally fight. Women and children? Completely excluded. The second pillar was mukhalafa, or strategic alliances. And the third was tabanni, which was full adoption. Let's actually zoom in on those last two for a second, because they perfectly show how wealth was designed to flow exclusively to those who could defend the tribe.
So, mukhalafa was essentially a political or military pact. 2 parties would pledge mutual protection in war and peace, and they'd even share the burden of paying blood money. But here's the kicker. This contract created automatic mutual inheritance rights. The crucial takeaway here is that during this time, a political contract for military defense could completely override actual blood relations when it came to passing down wealth.
Then there's tabanni. Now, this wasn't just taking care of an orphaned kid out of the goodness of your heart. Tabanni was a legal fiction. It treated the adopted child entirely as a biological heir, which effectively erased their original lineage. A really famous historical example is Zayd bin Haritha. He was adopted by the Prophet Muhammad before his prophethood and was actually temporarily known as Zayd bin Muhammad. In the Jahiliyyah system, this kind of adoption was primarily used as a strategic tool to just bolster tribes' numbers and military strength.
But we really need to pause and look at the devastating human cost of this utilitarian system. Because the law only rewarded military and economic strength, women and minors were completely excluded from inheriting anything. 0. And honestly, it gets worse. Widows weren't just ignored, they were commodified. When a man died, his male relatives could effectively inherit his widow, seizing her property and completely controlling her future. The vulnerable were literally passed down like objects.
Part 3. The Islamic legal revolution.
This massive legal revolution didn't just happen overnight. It was incredibly systematic and carefully paced to ensure social stability. Stage 1 tackled the worst abuse right out of the gate by freeing widows from being inherited against their will. Stage 2 corrected tabanni, insisting that adopted children keep their biological father's names to protect their true lineage. Stage 3 phased out inheritance based merely on those military alliances, prioritizing actual blood ties. In Stage 4, it explicitly guaranteed inheritance shares for women and minors, entirely regardless of their physical strength. When you put these two systems side by side, the contrast is just staggering. In the Jahiliyyah reality, women were treated as inherited objects, totally dependent, totally vulnerable. But under Islamic reform, women were established as legal subjects with their own protected property rights. The Quranic verses fundamentally severed the tie between the ability to fight and the right to inherit. It was a massive paradigm shift.
Part 4. Protecting the vulnerable. Ultimately, what we're looking at here are 5 major shifts that totally redefined human dignity. We move from relying on physical strength to formal legal ties.
We move from treating wealth as just a tool for the collective tribe to using it for individual protection. We transition from the fictional lineages of Talbot to actual identity certainty. We go from the open, easily manipulated customs of the strong to binding normative rules. And absolutely most importantly, women transition from objects to empowered legal subjects.
Now, you might be wondering what happens when there's an emergency. When the early Muslims fled from Mecca to Medina as refugees, they lost absolutely everything. To prevent a crisis, a temporary system called mu'aqa was established. It was a brotherhood between the refugees and the locals that temporarily allowed them to inherit from one another. But importantly, as the community stabilized, this was phased out. Inheritance was carefully transitioned back to family-based rights to ensure long-term, stable societal structures. It really shows how adaptable yet principled these reforms were.
And Part 5. Modern Application in Indonesia.
So how does this 1,400-year-old history lesson apply today? Well, the Indonesian compilation of Islamic law applies these exact historical victories. Today, in Indonesia, inheritance is based strictly on legal relationships, specifically blood and marriage. The system explicitly rejects economic contribution or physical might as a criteria for inheritance. And this is so vital because even today, you still see family disputes where a son might claim he deserves everything because he's the breadwinner or the head of the family. The law rejects that logic completely to ensure the rights of female heirs and the vulnerable are protected.
Okay, but what about adopted kids? Since the Islamic reform eliminated tabani to preserve biological lineage, does that mean adopted children are just left out in the cold? Actually, no. Modern Indonesian law uses a really brilliant mechanism called wasiat wajibah, which is an obligatory bequest. It grants adopted children up to 1/3 of the estate. It's this elegant compromise that honors the rule of preserving true lineage while making absolutely sure adopted children are still fully protected economically. There's a quote from the source material that hits the nail right on the head here. Quote, "When law only favors the strong, it easily becomes a tool for domination." That right there is the ultimate takeaway of this explainer. Looking at this shift from ancient customs to established rights isn't just about memorizing history. It's a masterclass in ethics. It reminds us that true justice doesn't just happen by accident. It requires very intentional, structural mechanisms to protect those who cannot physically or economically protect themselves. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Think about the modern family conflicts you see or hear about around you. How can recognizing these historical legal reforms prevent the strong, the wealthy, the loud, the powerful from dominating the weak in family disputes today? The shift from power to rights was a monumental leap for human dignity, and it's a standard we have to actively uphold today. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and as always, keep asking the big questions.